by the end of August, any electoral energy that the Democrats were going to get because of abortion had already been sort of like solidified. It was not going to grow in some respect. And, you know, I mentioned this at the top of the show. Dave Weigel said, like, you know, that's why you're seeing congressional races in blue states are, you know, sort of like abnormally favoring the Republicans because there isn't that sort of jeopardy that people feel about an abortion ban that they might feel in a purple state, let's say. And so there's been an absence of any type of sort of like broad message from the Democrats, you know, and I think like, I think to the extent that Biden's agenda was fulfilled, which is, you know, I don't know if you want to look at it in terms of just sheer numbers, maybe 15% or, you know, relative to Build Back Better. But there was the attempt on the student debt relief. It's tied up in the courts, but it's there. People can sign up for it. And I think that helped a little bit. And there was some movement on cannabis reform, enough that there was less of a story of them doing nothing, let's say.
Right.
There was a failure to sort of say like, okay, you get the abortion ban that could be coming. There's not going to be a federal abortion ban until Joe Biden's not president, let's say. But the Social Security thing was the first thing and they were late to the game on this, it seems to me, when it became clear that the strategy was going to be Republicans are going to leverage the debt ceiling to get cuts in Social Security. And you and I, and you in particular, on day one of the Obama administration and whatever it was, January 20th, 2008, you were like, people have got to watch out. This guy's been talking about so-called entitlement reform. We watched Joe Biden basically, you know, do an end run around Harry Reid and put it on the table. Fortunately, Mark Meadows and those lunatics were just they couldn't say yes. And Mitch McConnell wanted to sink Obama. But they started to use that late. And then just the other day, we're watching this from Joe Biden, which is really frustrating because this should have been a message much earlier, particularly when the Fed is starting to basically articulate, we're out to crash the economy because of so-called inflation, which is not to diminish the fact that people aren't paying higher prices for things. But inflation also comes with it, in our parlance, an entire backstory about what is causing it and then what we need to do to remedy it. And Biden rolls out a slightly different story about inflation, which is corporate greed. Here it is.
But rather than increasing their investments in America or giving American consumers a break, their excess profits are going back to their shareholders and they're buying back their stocks, so the executive pays are going to skyrocket.
All right, pause it for 1 second. He's talking about oil companies specifically here, but we're seeing this across the board with corporate profits in many sectors are going through the roof. And if the story that we're being told about inflation is that, and the chairman of the Fed just said the other day, like, we need to create more unemployment. We need to soften the labor market. If it was about wages, you wouldn't see these huge corporate profits, right? Because supposedly the price increases would be eaten up. But he's also talking about, like, you know, rail companies. He's talking about food companies and oil companies. Take it back from the beginning. Sorry.
But rather than increasing their investments in America or giving American consumers a break, their excess profits are going back to their shareholders and they're buying back their stocks, so the executive pays are going to skyrocket. Give me a break. Enough is enough. Look, I'm a capitalist. You've heard me say this before. I have no problem with corporations turning a fair profit or getting a return on their investment in innovation. But this is remotely what's happening. Oil companies' record profits today are not because they're doing something new or innovative. Their profits are a windfall of war. The windfall from the brutal conflict that's ravaging Ukraine and hurting tens of millions of people around the globe. You know, at a time of war, any company receiving historic windfall profits like this has a responsibility to act beyond their narrow self-interest of its executives and shareholders. I think they have a responsibility to act in the interest of their consumers, their community, and their country. To invest in America by increasing production and refining capacity, because they don't want to do that. They have the opportunity to do that. Lowering prices for consumers at the pump. You know, if they don't, they're going to pay a higher tax on their excess profits and face other restrictions. My team will.
All right. So he's basically there more or less announcing, you know, the potential for a windfall tax unless these oil companies cut into their profits. But this is the narrative that should have been from, frankly, you know, 4 months ago. And I mentioned that, you know, I covered the Warnock Walker debate. Warnock brought it up like twice. He said the words corporate profits and, you know, maybe gouging, but they didn't like hammer this because I don't know why.
I was just going to ask you why you think that is, because this one seems like a gimme. I don't really get it. What constituents of the Democrats are going to be upset by this message? How does that, you know, that's it. I mean, you know, that's the only thing that could be, but even that, you know, at this point, it seems to me like, you know, that it's kind of existential here. You know, donors are the least of their problems if we end up having the debt ceiling held hostage and the whole world economy crashes. I mean, that seems like a crazy trade-off to me. And I'm a little bit stymied by that. I mean, I think we talked about this. Maybe I just thought we did, but I think we talked about this at some point. The idea that you know, relying so heavily on the abortion message, which obviously had to be front and center and made perfect sense, but the idea of relying so heavily on it seemed a little odd to me, simply because, you know, we're in this post-pandemic period. You know, to the extent it is post-pandemic, but, you know, the post-pandemic period here, you know, everything's in chaos still. You know, there's still this sense of just total dislocation and nothing's returned to normal. I mean, everything still feels very, very much in turmoil. And you have to address that. You have to address that, and you have to do it in a sort of a systemic way. It seems to me you got to give people. First of all, you have to acknowledge that it's happening and say, you know, we get it. This, you know, we feel the same way. And then you have to sort of say, look, you know, sort of chop it up and say, you know, these are the things that are going on, and here's how that's all related. Because to me, the global sort of issue, that issue of the, you know, turmoil stemmed from two things: the pandemic and the Donald Trump administration and the era that we had just come through, and the ongoing assault on democracy that sort of was a consequence of that. Those two things, you know, are easily sort of put together into a narrative that just sort of never really gelled if they even tried. And now you have Republicans coming back in playing. I mean, it's astonishing that they are planning to come back in with exactly the same playbook that they had when they left, which is, you know, I mean, we're going to cut taxes, we're going to cut Social Security and Medicare, and we're, you know, I mean, I haven't heard them saying that they're going to, you know, overturn Obamacare, but I think that's going to be part of entitlement reform now. I think they're just going to put that.
They'll try and roll back the Medicaid, I would imagine,
absolutely,
in some fashion or another.
And probably the subsidies as well. I have no reason to believe otherwise. So, you know, you're absolutely right. I mean, these are things that were just sort of hanging out there. It seemed like low-hanging fruit with the windfalls profit, the Social Security, which was in Rick Scott's plan, and he came out with that last spring, I think.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
this goes back to my critique about them not getting ahead of narratives and pushing things, is that they're constantly playing prevent defense, and then they're like, oh wait, we have to push the ball down the field at the you know, because they actually could come back and win this thing.
I mean, I think this is I think this is, I mean, you know, Emma said donors, and I am of the mind that Democrats could go out in this environment and say, we're going to put corporations on trial, you know, and they would still be able to communicate to these corporations like, not really.